Hi, Shermaine.
Hi.
So today is International Human Rights Day. So can you
Yes.
give us some preview on what's happening in our school here in UP Tacloban?
Here in UP Tacloban, I guess everybody realizes that we are so-called geographically isolated, and and they consider UP Tacloban a very relatively silent campus compared to the rest of the regional and autonomous units of the UP system. However, that fact may it actually be a fact or just a fallacy. Uh, it doesn't excuse anyone here in UP Tacloban to be a little more conscious about what's happening. Just the simple fact that we belong in one UP system, it doesn't isolate us from the education problems that not just UP students are currently faced with, but basically everybody who is enrolled in state and state colleges and other universities. Other than that, there there are still a lot of restraints, especially on freedom of expression, especially that college writers or um, not even if you're not exactly part of any publication, um, a mere form of association to a particular organization that is being red tagged by anyone in the military or in the police force, they automatically think that you are a youth wing of some rebellious anti-government entity, and it actually hinders someone from expressing what he or she wants to express, and basically restraints on human rights is ex- restraints on human rights is basically a bad thing, especially if it happens in a so-called democratic sphere. Schools are supposedly democratic. Schools should actually respect viewpoints, may it be clashing or not, may it be clashing, for as long as nobody is deprived of expressing his or her sentiments, and freedom of expression is a basic human right. And even in schools, it's actually very disappointing to observe that even teachers commit that kind of deprivation. Other than education, other than freedom of expression, basically, the access to the basic social services such as healthcare and other means of deprivation is already a deprivation of an inherent human right.
Okay, so right now we celebrate Human Rights Day. So how are we going to act on this, or what are the actions being done right now? I heard there's a Black Shirt Day today, a Black Shirt Day observance. What else?
Actually, today is the international commemoration of the Human Rights Day, and it's agreed upon in the whole UP system that we're going to wear black or any shirt or any form of clothing with black on it as a statement of support to everyone who condemns the idea of human rights violations. You show your statement of support to those who vomit the idea of human rights violations, to those who want to end impunity already. Other than Black Shirt Day, earlier we had an ecumenical mass sponsored by the religious sector and a mob that uh, actually raised calls of awareness to the people, especially to the people of Tacloban. People see the people of Tacloban as, of course, relatively silent again compared to other places or other regions who basically experience the same labor issues, experience the same freedom of expression deprivations, and other than what's currently happening at school or here in Tacloban, other organizations or other sectors outside Tacloban are also having press releases. They're also having human rights awareness campaigns. And other than that, I think they started mobilizing the people. They started educating the people a few months back then to make sure that the commemoration of for this day will actually be a success. Everybody gets to be informed, and everybody will have to understand how people are actually deprived of something that they should actually have access to begin with, because um, quoting somebody from the religious sector, she actually said that human rights are inherent, but how come that something inherent is still being denied? Everybody should understand how it feels, and by way of understanding it, it's not that hard to make people understand it, to make people act upon it.
Okay. So, how grave or what is the human rights situation here in Eastern Visayas?
I guess people, especially the students here in UP Tacloban, I don't know if they know, but uh, last uh, last 2010, a UP professor actually died in Cananga Leyte, because that said botanist was actually accused, or actually red tagged, or was actually accused of being associated with a rebel group, and other than the usual red tagging that's currently happening to most organizations, or most progressive and organized organizations here in Tacloban, there are tuition rates hikes, not exactly the basic tuition, but there are a lot of redundant fees in some educational institutions. Other than that, some student writers also complain of their administration screening their articles. One publication even said their sentiments, or even expressed their disappointment when they already published their output, but the administration actually cut the whole article. It 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 kind of like left a big hole in one of the major pages of their paper, and that is something that they didn't really like, and that's something that the students of that university didn't also like. So that's the case here.
So, how aware are students or young people of Tacloban or Eastern Visayas about human rights issues and human rights?
Actually, um, they may know that these things are actually happening, but behind the facade, but behind the series of events, it's hard for people, for the more educated people, to actually assess whether how much do these people really understand what's happening, what instances back then made these particular things from happening again. Um, I don't know whether people outside this university, the University of the Philippines, actually understand, but maybe they know because they hear it from the news, they hear it from all sorts of media, they hear it almost anywhere, anytime. Even talk about it, even just as simple as riding a trike or a cab back home. But in terms of, but what's really important is the extent of which they really understand that particular situation, and understanding is still something that that's very lacking from the people. How how are we so sure of it? Because most people are still expressing their, not exactly disgust, but you get the idea that they still reject the idea of marching to the streets to call for an action. They even reject ideas of educating people about what basically human rights are, what happened back then, and that kind of behavior manifested by the people is still something which needs to be cured, and it's high time that we do something about it.
Yeah. Almost all of students, especially from state universities and colleges, are affected with government decreasing state subsidy to education. But aside from that, and based on your experiences, what other human rights violations is being perpetrated by the government to young people?
Other than the usual slashes on the education budget, and other than the usual cases of red tagging, one of the more serious matters that students actually experience is the lack of security in even in their own campuses, to the extent that people don't trust their school anymore. They don't trust their school, or they don't exactly feel confident about the school protecting them. And it's something that affects students even on a psychological level. When you're disturbed, you cannot exactly focus on your studies. Basically, protection is an inherent human right, and when it's deprived, we know what other things that may come next. And because of the lack of protection, or because of the lack of security, rape cases happen, theft or robberies happen, and what's bothering is that when uh, people who shouldn't have any access to the school to begin with, can actually enter can actually enter the school premises, and what do you call this, abuse students, abuse people, uh,
Harass.
harass whatsoever. And the numbers are growing, and it's very alarming.
Lastly, as a writer and as an editor-in-chief of a school publication, how can you make a difference? How can you make people, especially youth, aware of human rights, of their rights, and what's happening inside and outside of campus?
There are basically three things that we need to remember. First, we have to know ourselves, because um, if we don't know what we want, if we don't know who we are, if we basically don't know how to understand ourselves, then how can we actually be able to understand others? How can we be able to understand other people's suffering? How can we be able to relate ourselves to others when there's no connection to begin with? We have to understand that we're actually at par with each other. No one is actually superior or inferior. We're all equal in the face of the law. We have to recognize that we have equal rights, which we actually should fight for. Other than knowing what's inherent on us, should also take an effort to understand what's happening. I mean, it's not that much of a burden to hear news every once in a while, because awareness, or rather education, is something that will actually save us. When you're more informed, when you get to know what's currently happening, that would be to your advantage. Basically, things are already happening, but but there's this but there's some kind of a social, what do you call this, social concealment, or society conceals what's happening. We have to be the more responsible people to unveil whatever it is that conceals what's currently happening, because if we don't exactly do that, or if we don't do that ourselves, then would actually be we will be victims of misinformation, and misinformation is something that we don't deserve at the end of the day. And lastly, we have to take a stand. We have to know which side do we actually fight for, and we don't have to be afraid of the things that we may do after we did an action. As a writer, I write, but other than being a writer, or other than what you currently are right now, you shouldn't limit yourself of the things that you can actually do. Being a writer, or rather, if you're a writer, you cannot just write. You can speak. You can teach people. If you're not if you're not a writer, that doesn't mean you cannot do something. If you're not that educated, or if you're not enrolled in a state university, that doesn't mean you cannot do something. You can still help, because the accumulated efforts, especially coming from the youth, is already a statement. When everybody, especially if the youth will help each other, if all the youth will actually gather their efforts and tell their stand, explicitly show what they actually want. That actually sends a message that even the youth are very serious in in reminding everyone, especially the government or especially the perpetrators of human rights violations, that these human rights violations have to end, and they have to end now.
Thank you, Shermaine.